totally removed from this. When I first came to Nederland, people were moving houses up here from over. The university was expanding. And I think I hold a record of being the only person that got a house stuck in the house when I moved. So I mean, on pictures of what happened. One of my biggest mistakes ever. And so the house started through the tunnel. But what happened was the guy in charge forgot to measure the west end of the tunnel. And it's not a tunnel, it's a funnel. So I'll leave this here and look at it.
Funneled right down onto you.
So the interesting thing that happened is when I finally got the house to Nederland, many people in town came out to help me fix it. I didn't suffer any antagonism or animosity, but I did become famous overnight.
Tunnel run.
I'm sorry?
How long was it in the tunnel?
Well, it took 3 days to push it out and back. People had to either go through Wonderview or through.
No animosity, you said?
From the people that came to help out, it was amazing. So what I did for the town is I ran the building across the street for a few years. I was the town library, and it was a volunteer library, bring a book, take a book type of thing. Because the town had inherited the house next door, and they had no use for it. So I used it as a library. And maintained it. So the house, the town sold it, and the new house was built by a private owner. And that was a lot of fun, actually. It was hard, to say the least.
And Lana's done a lot for the town over the many, many years that he's been here. And he's very passionate about the town, has a lot of history, came here, worked at the branding iron, washing dishes in 1957.
Yeah.
Is just absolutely invested emotionally in this town.
So, really, I'm hoping for a format of answering your questions. I really think you have a pretty good idea of what's proposed. But if you don't, just ask questions, and we'll try and answer them to the best of our ability.
And I'm going to ask a favor because I don't know all of you folks. Could we go around the room really quick and just introduce?
I'm Britt. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a community planner for the town of Nederland. I work with the Planning Commission and the Board of Zoning.
I'm Jesse Severs and I'm on the Board of Trustees. I'm up for re-election.
Linda Glassler, and I'm on the planning.
Mayor, trustee, don't vote for me because I'm not on the vote for you anyway.
Roger Cornell, Planning Commission. Steve Williams, Chair, Planning Commission.
Jim Reese, I'm Vice Chair of the Planning Commission.
Luke Miller, new appointee on BOT.
Nicole Sterling, BOT.
Tom Mahold, trustee, mayor pro tem, and trustee liaison on the planning commission. And candidate.
Billy Giblin, I'm the mayor, and running for re-election. And you need to be the mayor. And I was on the planning commission for a couple of years, starting in 2020 and the PZA's 2018.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You run since this project?
Yes. I've been working with Ron for 15 years on this project. In earnest, well, not even 15 years in earnest, working on this project in these different parcels. And so we're excited.
What was your name?
Nancy Blackwood.
Sorry, Nancy, it's Miranda. I wonder, it might be helpful for you to know who's online as well. I'm happy to kind of rattle off some names really quick.
Can I just say, there's two people in the room too.
Oh, cool.
Katrina Harms and Andrew. Yeah, you said. That's right. Okay, go ahead.
So we have Commissioner Timmy Duggan, Trustee Tanya
Hey, everybody.
Corbalon,
Mhm.
Melody Baumhover is a member of, so it's the chair of SAB, Christopher Larson, former Board of Trustees, a current candidate, Kathleen Chipai, community member, David Seitz, community member, Christopher Kelly, who is with the Mountaineer, Cheney Bostic, who is with Studio Seed and is working on our comprehensive plan, Caleb Schmitz, also with SE Group, working on our comp plan, Barbara Hart with the Mountaineer, and then we have a call-in user and a guest, thinking maybe one is Deb Deandra. But I did have to meet the call-in user if you wanted to press *6 and announce yourself. But otherwise that's,
This is Deb
Cool.
DeAndrea.
great. And that's who you have online.
Thanks, Miranda.
Thanks.
And just really quick for those of you in the room, the owl is super sensitive. And so like side chatter, it's going to try to grab it from every which direction. And so just being really mindful of kind of independent speaking. I don't know, Mayor Billy, if you wanted to kind of call on people throughout this since I'm not in the room or how you want to work that. But I think that's going to be really important for those online is to have that one at a time speaking.
Okay. I guess for sake of that, yeah. When it's time for us to ask questions, maybe we'll go in the room first, then we'll go to folks online.
And Ron, I'm getting some feedback too for you, just to maybe lean in a little closer towards the microphone when you speak. And then other thing is, Eric, those of you down at the end where Eric and Roger are, you need to probably yell because it's super quiet for you. That's it for the housekeeping. I think we're good to continue.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Are you open for questions now? Is that?
Yes.
So why don't we start in the room? Does anyone in the room ask questions for Ron and Nancy?
Yes, and comments. We're looking for feedback on the design and of the different parcels and everything about the project. Any comments? Besides questions.
You guys are have to speak up.
So the question, we had a bunch of questions at our December 20th planning commission meeting. Are those all been answered in the packet or should we go over those?
I think we have, but let's go over it.
I'm not aware of the questions, so maybe that's fine.
Did it make it into the,
I don't.
minutes?
No, so this is the same aim that went before the planning commission because the board of trustees wasn't there. So Britt started to pull together the aim for the official PUD hearing, which would capture all of the planning commission's questions, but unfortunately they're not in here.
Okay.
Do you guys remember all of them? Okay, well, let's start with what you remember and then we'll go from there.
Well, then I just want to comment, Roger Cornell, that I missed that meeting and I have to say I did not, I reviewed the packet that was sent to us, the aim. I did see all the things and I guess I thought that there'd be more of a presentation to go over that aim tonight and then to respond and do it. So, I had, I guess I just a few things, you just see if they're there, and if they're in the package, it's fine, so very quickly. Number one, it's actually calling for upper housing, more increased housing, and under the PUD, the residential cannot be changed, the number of residents per that zoning. So I just wanted to comment that if we want to do different kind of things there. Under PUD, we actually had to change the zoning before we could enter into the PUD. At least from the way I understand, that historically we've always done it. So you can't do residential increase under the PUD. Now, you can do it in the central business district, it's not a problem, what I read in Ames, which you've actually kind of addressed that, you know, the PUD, but when you address the lots that were not under central business district, and that's the only one that I see, the number one. So that was the first thing.
When you say number one, what you're talking about?
That's the
The
hillside.
number, the hillside.
Hillside.
It's not in central business.
It's not in the CBD.
Right.
It's high density residential.
It's, yeah.
That's just one.
So we need to deal with that or get advice how we would do that all in one time. And I, for one, feel like, you know, we need to just address it.
Yeah, I read in the plan that it was being proposed to increase it to high density residential zoning rather than leaving it even density as it currently is. Is that correct?
That is the
But I think he's just saying that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
Either as part of the PUD or something.
Or I would say before that,
Probably, I think before.
if you're gonna follow the way the code is written now.
Actually, do I understand this? The zoning is high density residential. The comp plan shows it as medium density residential.
So could we get clarification on that from anyone?
Do you know?
I'll look at that.
Because the way this reads suggests that it's currently medium density
But that's what I said.
and that you're proposing an increase to high density.
I didn't go, I went to the zoning map.
Yeah.
And I apologize, that's my mistake.
Have both sides, you know. It's up here. Either way, either high density.
Right. I mean, we have done increases in density under for a little bit. A little bit of development.
You guys are gonna need to speak up a lot more.
Well, no, it was, that was on the neighborhood. Right. But they had to require. In fact, they did
Okay, so yes, Roger, you're right.
Well, while we're looking at that, I think, I would like to say that I think the most compelling topic of discussion is the comments from the town staff. And the police department, the fire department, and the streets department all had comments at the beginning of the aim. And, you know, they all kind of discussed the impact to the town from a big picture point of view, from an infrastructure point of view. And I think that is an important topic for us to all wrap our heads around. I'm curious if, you know, Ron, you and Nancy would care to, you know, respond to some of those comments in there and kind of, sure, you know, speak to it.
Probably.
That's what the comments were.
Right.
And.
Well, maybe we can address them in order that they appear in the package, just so everyone can follow.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good idea.
And I don't know, Jesse, that we even need an answer, like the question we just had. That's just something that needs to be answered.
No matter what, yeah.
On the next meeting. Don't need it now.
Yeah, we don't want to be in a quasi situation and not know whether or not things are zoned in whichever way they are. So that should be clear. Okay.
Apologize, that was my mistake. Basically, Jesse, to it.
Well, let's recap the comments and then we can address them one at a time, I think. Yeah. Who has the aim pulled up?
I got it right here. I mean, the first one was from the Nederland Fire Department.
I think it's sheriff's office first.
Was it Sheriff's Office first?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Sheriff's Office first. I mean, they're essentially suggesting that this will be a, what is it, 24% increase in people in town. what their sort of estimate, which they are suggesting require an additional deputy to be tacked on our contract here with the sheriff and the budget that we have for both the sheriffs. So I'm not sure. Address that, but
I think it's really important to remember that this is a, sorry, it's a phased project.
Their level of competence. As far as the policy amendment, I don't think we have any comment other than they feel it's gonna happen, so.
though, as Nancy was just about to say, I think that the idea that this is a phased project means that we're not seeing a 24% increase
Right away.
It's like from one day to the next.
Mhm.
It's going to be a gradual increase over time. Hopefully, if things go according to plan, we would be looking at maybe some increased revenues over the phasing of the project that would allow us to do that, but
Yeah.
there's no guarantee of that.
That's the concept. And we're talking 5 to 10 years. So 24%, it's not like everybody's gonna all of a sudden land in Netherlands in these projects. And it will take some time.
That would seem like the easiest of all the considerations to grapple with.
While we're on the topic of the timeline, so you just said 5 to 10 years, is that kind of all the phases? That's the general range?
That's too I'll make a comment on what I think is probably the most significant question that was asked. And that was, what would the impact be on the water and sewer systems?
Yeah.
And Brandon and I and Nancy and several others met JVA, and we committed to them to study and find out with their expertise just what it would be and what level and which project would trigger the need for additional sewer capacity. Certainly, they feel that the water line going down First Street would have to be enlarged. So we're going to meet with them soon, I think next month or this month.
Next week.
Next week.
Wait, isn't it next week? No.
And get their analysis in terms of what point this would be triggered. Certainly the Amsterdam won't do it, probably not the Rotterdam. But then if we go into the development of the bigger project, which is number 6, that probably would do it. So their work is to how far in advance you're gonna have to start planning, because if it does trigger the need for new facilities, we have to work together to plan on that. And it's a state requirement. So they've been commissioned to do that. We've agreed to pay for it. And we should have word by next week, their preliminary analysis of what that will be. So somebody have those questions handy where you?
Well, and they're also JV. Give us kind of a parcels so that what we can do is take that and play around with what the impacts are and plan the phasing of this project based on the impacts to the infrastructure, as well as the need for the community to provide. I mean, I was just spending some time this afternoon reading the housing impact study. What's it called?
Housing needs study.
Housing needs study. Assessment. And I was just floored at how much housing is lacking, especially in the types of products that we're talking about, we're proposing, which is the duplexes and the triplexes and the multifamily. So I feel really excited that this kind of starts to address those concerns and those statistics.
Does anyone have those numbers off the top there?
126 units that we're lacking.
26 units.
Yep.
And that doesn't necessarily count bedrooms, but you know, if they're all 3-bedroom units, it might be it's less versus if they're all 1-bedroom.
I mean, it did give a range like, hey, this is especially that missing middle, right? It was those 2-bedroom type of entities that we're sorely lacking. We've got plenty of the single family homes, right? But it's that middle layer that we severely lack.
126.
Mhm.
And how many units are you guys proposing that would be dwelling units?
165.
165.
Well, and again, so that's our 126 gap. And there's also units that we have dedicated to the promise of Prop 123. So it's a 13 that we've dedicated or promised to of affordable housing. So,
Surpass our needs.
well, and it's also a question of whether or not what's being proposed also fits with some of the income levels that we need to tackle with our housing plan, right?
I think it is 165 are slated to be affordable.
I believe they are.
Well, if there's,
Has that changed?
I mean, if we're calling for 13 and then that are designated affordable and deed restricted, that's one thing. However, if there's you know,
Right.
well, I would assume that the market rate on an open market on one of these units would be less than a house on Caribou Ridge, for example.
But it's
Or-
not necessarily affordable.
Well, not with the deed restriction and the state requirement for Prop 123, correct?
Yeah.
But it could still arguably be affordable from the generic definition of it.
Well, there's certainly be price differentials between buffet apartments. And we don't have four bedroom in the entire system.
Just
Because we're targeting that middle section that's missing. And so the lower priced units are certainly going to be the ones with much less floor space. So if you have a $400 studio or 400 square foot studio apartment, certainly it's not going to cost what a 3-bedroom apartment is going to cost. And that's how we find a target those markets.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And working with partners perhaps. Like
Perhaps. There's many options.
there's options for different partners to provide affordable housing that are out there that we can work with.
Well, yeah, and the town is currently also working with partners. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I think that, when you do a private development, I'm thinking of the project that was done in Boulder, in the very north, no.
Everyone has to speak a lot louder for folks online. They're saying everyone's voices are muffled. So, and I can't.
Well, we can
We might be able to talk to speaker to Mayor Phillies. He's the only one with the mic and laptop.
So you're suggesting something
Yeah, but
like
close to connected to that device.
Nicole,
Okay.
You can buy.
Like more in the middle. So everything.
Maybe if we do all
So now that we're on this topic, there was a question that I had, because I didn't really understand what it was referring to in the summary papers. It says, how do these proposed developments support the goals and objectives of the housing needs assessment 30th September 2014? And the base of that page, it says, proposed attainable housing strategy for the above residential developments. Goal, to provide incentives to move into market rate housing after a maximum of 4 years to allow others to take advantage of affordable housing opportunities. And I was wondering what exactly that was referring to. Like, is it saying that these are going to be, like, year one is going to be 40% of market rate? Once these
That's right.
start being renovated?
Few units we would have. This is a affordable housing plan. One of the things everybody should know about housing in Nederland already is the amplitudes of sales go up and down far greater than we do in a larger market like Boulder. This is true for both rental and ownership. So as they turn over, when there's a lot of houses for sale, the price goes down. So if a person is a school teacher, for example, they got to be in class on September 1st, we would have a unit available. I see is, I want to answer the direct question first. They would start at that for the first year, 40% of the market. Or they get a 40% discount, not 40% of the market.
Yeah, 40% off.
They would be paying 60% of the
Right.
market. The next year, they would pay 10% more. And it would go for 4 years until they were at market, giving them enough time to go through 3 cycles trying to find alternative accommodations that fit their budget. And this does happen. I've seen it happen a lot. People have rented a unit for a year or two, keep looking for something, make contacts and find what they need and want in their price. But you can't do it the day you come to and have to go work, teach a class. It takes time. This is an opportunistic way to help somebody understand how the market functions and to take advantage of it.
Do you have is there a, because I couldn't tell from here, maybe I just didn't read it correctly.
I'm sorry, that wasn't really made clear.
Were there particular units that you had in mind for this and which development?
Usually, the smaller units, 2 bedrooms or less. Because if somebody wants a 3-bedroom, they usually have children and they're usually they plan ahead a little better. It's hard to say. You just never know what's going to happen. We might end up with, you have to be flexible.
Yeah.
You might know that 2 months of 1 bedroom is coming up and you might have to put that person in a 3-bedroom for a month until it comes up. The idea is to provide a mechanism whereby somebody is not denied employment because of their inability to find housing. So it's, I find that a successful management tool, as long as people are dedicated to the philosophy.
So you would use this strategy across the residential development?
Yes.
Not just in one particular.
You'd have to do it across the.
Okay.
And that would be.
Because if you try to restrict one unit, it may not be available a lot. So, and at some point, there will limit how many you can do. Maybe 5, 7. It's a negotiated thing because the income at 40% discount has to be made up from somewhere else.
Yep. Like that clarifies that a lot.
Plus not all units show up at the same time.
Right.
There in a, the number of units we propose, there'll always be traffic being in and out.
All of the units that you're proposing, are they all rental?
Yes.
There's none that would be for sale.
Okay, and none of them are, yeah, so all of them are at market rate. None of them would be deed restricted for affordability, correct?
That's correct. Declining.
Say that again?
Short term.
Are any, yeah, so the hotel would be short-term, right? Short-term rental, but the rest,
If we had a situation where all of the committed units were filled, we'd be willing to use hotel and on a temporary short term for people like that also. Because some hotel rooms would have kitchens.
for potential, if short-term meaning like 3 months at a time, or like our seasonal folks that might come through, seasonal workers. Yeah, gotcha.
It's definitely want some short-term seasonal worker units.
Okay.
Hey, Ron, this is Jim Reese. Some of the things that came up on the planning commission that we talked about, if it was in the packet, I didn't get a chance to read through it. Was there an answer to what was going to, the solution for the businesses on First Street when you were in this long construction period? You were going to be tying these up. He said, hey, people feel uncomfortable because they're worried, hey, I'm going to have a 60-70% drop in business, we'll be forced to close. And you didn't really give us any kind of direct, plan on how you would help mitigate that. And I think that's one of the things that would help the business owners and some of the residents feel more comfortable about a project that might take 3 years, tying up construction.
Okay, I think your question has 2 components. One concerns what my accounts will do, and the other concerning what the rest of the businesses will do.
The other side of the street, that lady.
Yes, let me address what my tendencies do and how I've structured that. Every one of them wants to, will move into the new commercial areas in the Amsterdam and the Rotterdam. Some tenants notably are not going to continue. Most likely the Wings of Place boutique will not continue. And the Rock Shop has decided that they will move their inventory to Fort Collins rather than move to another place if they so choose. And he may retire. It's very hard for me to know what Roy Young, who's prior to the Rock Shop, will do. But currently that's what his statement is going to be. I've gone to all of my tenants and discussed the options with them, and I can give you each one's answer if you want it at this time. But all have been consulted and all knew, except the Rock Shop. When they moved in, that redevelopment was imminent. So 15 years ago, it was imminent. And I'll run down what the plans are. Different proprietors. We start with the Rock Shop, move it to Fort Collins.
Honestly, I'm a little bit more concerned about the businesses on the other side of the street and how they're designed.
All the perimeter businesses all the way around, First Street, Snyder Street.
Well, let's start with, what was that is Mike, he's retired. And he does not want another vet to move in. So that's fine. He has a 20-year lease and he's willing to cancel his lease. And he's willing to stay, but he only works 2 days a week now. He flies in every week from Montana, works 2 days and flies back to Montana. So he's waiting for somebody to take over his business. On the other side of the street, the other merchants, probably the worst thing that they're worried about is the parking that will be taken up along First Street, the 27 spaces from 119 to Snyder. Some say it's 24, but if you close my two driveways, it would be 27. So our plan is to increase the parking on parcel number 2, which is 100 East First Street, from 20 cars that were allowed under residential zoning. Now, under your amendment, we could park 60 cars there easily. There's enough space to do it. And we possibly might use parking lifts. That's something to be determined. But that would increase the overall parking by double for the rest of those businesses. The other thing that we've done, that's consideration, it's also part of the architecture too, is to set back our buildings 20.
For those of you online, I've just messaged them that we can't hear them.
I didn't understand.
Can you hear us now?
Yep, we're good. Okay, keep going.
Okay.
So, and also, I think that they're comfortable with that. I don't think there were many developers that planned far ahead, but that was in purchasing that site. There were two real considerations. One is to have additional parking for the rest of the business community, and to have a site for a new bridge, if the town so desires that. And that's part of our commitment in this, is to work with the town to put the bridge and connect Snyder and Congress streets.
What about the through traffic? What about there's a lot of, all the different things that are happening. I think, are you saying you're going to guarantee that you're going to leave that open and they're always going to be able to get through there? There's not going to be any, you are going to do that. I'm saying, well, that's important. That's an important thing to tell people. Okay, so I hadn't heard you say that before. So there's never going to be a time where that's going to be closed down for 2 weeks or something like that?
Only when there's utility hookups and when we have to provide to put an increased sized water. JV was pretty sure that there's a 6-inch line down there now. It's probably going to have to go to 8 or 10. So whether or not we can put that water line inside the business, the building, inside that 20-foot setback, or whether we have to leave it in the street. I'm personally very willing to give the town an easement to put the water line on private property so that, in the future too, that the manholes to maintain that line, would be more accessible than they are right now. Couple of months ago, I was standing in the street watching them work on the sewer, cover there, and the town pulled out a chunk of concrete this big. And where it came from, nobody knew, but it was plugging up the sewer system. So trying to work with the town and designing the new systems where ease of maintenance will be a lot better. And I don't know if you all know it or not, but there's dozens of old used cars, junk cars that are in First Street. Because years ago, 100 East First Street was a junkyard. And to get rid of the cars, they put them in the street to make the incline from 119 to Snyder not quite as steep a slope. That made the sewer line in front of the covered wagon terminal in Pioneer Run 14 feet down. And so to get to it, to maintain it, you got to go through a bunch of junk cars, and that's just impractical. So one of the things that happened is that somebody did that, and then the next guy came along, ran all the sewer lines over to Second Street. So the rock shop sewer line runs under U-Haul, and that is a real mess. That's one of the reasons we need redevelopment, is the incredible mistakes that were made in the past with these buildings. And the sewer problem is a classic example of very poor planning.
Well, I would say that's something that you, as the project manager, can't really control. So that's great, but within your control, as far as deliveries, construction, and all that, you're saying, we're gonna make sure that everybody can get into Bruisey Brews, they can get into, the apothecary shop.
With some exceptions.
Okay.
Certainly when you have to dig into the street to dig up the water line, that's a 2-week project minimum.
But then the town will be having to notify businesses, but you're committing to say, nothing that you're doing as part of the construction process is gonna block off their business, other than. I mean, the one thing. Yeah, okay, that's good. I think that would be, and if you communicated that to the businesses over there on the other side of the street, when you talk to them?
Not specifically, but I sure can, but.
Well, I bet they'd be like to hear that, yeah.
It should be part of the PUD as well.
I'm sorry.
That'd be part of the
Part of
PUD.
your application.
Yeah.
To spell all that out.
Good.
And there were some people at the community workshop that we did who we did talk to and allayed their fears. And that's addressed in the attachment A2, which was our response to the community open house comments.
And I'll address that. Probably the most concerned business person on the south side of the street was the t-shirt shop that's in the Igloti building. And they came from San Diego, where someone had done a project and didn't have very much of a plan for the adjacent merchants, and it created extreme stress on them. So they came to the meeting and were very concerned as to what would happen. And I'll just put out my experience in Nederland. A one product store usually has real difficulty in terms of sales, particularly in the winter. And so this is, again, if you can think of ideas that would help those businesses more that I haven't, or my team hasn't, bring them forward now or as soon as you think of them, because we're very willing to try and help those businesses. And I've even gone to them. Some of the businesses now don't have enough space for their trash cans, and so I let them park their trash cans on my property at no charge, and have for many, many years. But at some point, I'm recommending, and I've made a point of this, that I think we need a sanitation district in the downtown area to centralize the trash collection, the recycling, and clean up the downtown. Because one of my tenants, Ms. Magnolia, is religiously cleaning up the parking lot every morning. She complains about it, and I do too. So do my employees. But there's a lot of trash flowing around the downtown area that needs to be addressed. So I'm gonna do my best. All of the trash, that was one of the concerns too. And recycling will be indoors. And there will be rolling steel doors, just like a visitor center restrooms that go down where people cannot come and the public can come and use those trash cans. Almost twice a week, probably more. I come up here, there's trash on the dumpster, but not even my dumpsters that people left overnight. And it's just infuriating. So again, we're in rapid move. That's what I recommend that is part of this plan. I know I've talked to Kyle Busey about it. Kyle just really wants to stay with what he's doing right now. He'd like to have a cement container or a cement wall around his trash can. But he has a deal with the Crosscut Pizza to put their trash in his trash can because they don't have any place to put it. At some point, that relationship is going to wear thin. So I think that this is a community, business community concern that needs to be addressed, but I can only make recommendations on my own property. And I've talked to these people about it and I haven't had much success. Other than telling them, look, I want to work with you. You're not going to be able to have your trash cans on my property anymore, even though they've been there for 20 years. There's going to be a hole in it pretty soon. So sometimes people just want to think about something. And I'm going to give this as an example. I've been hearing people talk about a second bridge through this town since I came here 60 years ago. Well, we just had an accident on the bridge last week and it blocked up traffic all the way to the dam, all the way to the Sundance restaurant in less than about 15 minutes. I don't know if anybody knows about that.
Yep.
Was anybody there? Did anybody see it besides me?
Angela was walking with the kid right at
I was gonna run an errand and just went home. I couldn't catch it.
So, I hope that answered your question.
That was an important one that people are concerned about.
Yeah, the big one.
Let's see, you want to continue going through?
Well, it's up to the comments from the town staff in the packet, and I was just curious to hear Ron and Nancy's kind of response to those.
Keep going down.
Stay on it.
Let's stay on track.
So the Nederland Fire Protection District, reviewed Marshall Johnson, the application. And once assurances that the final PUD will include all fire amendments that are proposed, including alarms, smoke detectors, standpipes, and all buildings required. I assume that would be the case. Fire department would like to see fire lane, truck access, garage access for truck, and a safe way for a ladder to mount to roof and update any fire hydrants within 600 feet of the facilities. He also says the fire department prefers the answer to not have a rooftop system.
But did they put a reasoning for that?
They did not.
Okay.
I am at odds with the fire department on that particular issue. I've had hotels where cities, New York City requires everyone to have, because there's not enough flow through for a major fire in a city like that, everybody has to have a cistern on the top of the building. I think it's a functionally excellent thing to do. Why the fire department, what their reasons are for that, but I'm going to put one on every one of these buildings.
We should probably find out why though, because that's an expensive
Yeah.
venture, and if they're saying no, there's probably a reason.
What would they say?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to talk to him.
Remember any reasoning?
No, they didn't get it. They just said, "Get that."
More, then what about some of the other points?
Well, as far as.
We meet the fire code.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
that's
that I'm not
That's a softball.
concerned about, but the question of a fire lane and truck access.
Right through the center of this development.
I'm not sure where.
It was
he's
a-
suggesting that a fire lane.
It's, let's turn to.
I don't think he was clear on where he wanted it, did he?
No.
We
was-
provide-
I
we
think
have
he just
provided
wants to make
with the
sure.
3 buildings, there is a fire.
Yeah.
And designed to hold fire trucks, and will be constructed to hold fire trucks. And is to them for really 3 reasons. One was fire protection. 2 was to have truck deliveries off of the First Street.
Mhm.
It'll hold 5 52-foot semis. And it really creates a much better situation than the safety thing we have right now with people walking on the street. And 2 or 3 large 52-foot delivery trucks going down and blocking traffic on the outside of the street. So, and I'll just tell you one of the very interesting facts. First Street slants down like this, and Second Street slants at a much less level. And at one point, the 2 streets are level right between, and that's the point where this driveway is.
Yeah.
So, I have a long discussion with them on these issues. As far as their needs, we would like to have a height exception. We're applying for a height exception. Their current foot won't reach higher than 35 feet. That's why there is a 35-foot. But there are several solutions to that. You could put fire escapes down 1 story. You could build little decks that are entirely used for fire protection. Come off the building, you can use what are called jomming ladders. I don't know if you've ever seen these. They look like a grain gutter, but they fold out. And they are a ladder that is disguised as the drain gutter, and they just fold down. They're used a lot in Europe. I have tried them myself. My daughter rented a house when she was in med school. It was 3 stories high, all wood and no fire escapes at all. So I personally, well, she had a 4-year lease on the place. I installed one of those ladders myself because I was really worried, because she had the front room that was the furthest from the stairs, and they didn't have 2 exits. So I got the permission from the landlord, and it functions very well. And it's fun. Some of the girls, when they leave their keys, then they use the ladder to get back into the building.
What's the height exception you're asking for?
Sorry,
What's the height exception you're asking for?
between 40 and 45 feet.
Between 40 and
10, between 5 and 10 feet.
additional from our 35-foot that's in the code.
That's only on the time crossing, not on any of the.
Stop.
Just that.
50 feet for the east building and 45 feet for the west building.
No.
I live with I similar, similar. Number 6, the main. That's on the line in here.
No, the proposed, proposing 50 feet for the east building and 45 feet for the west building.
50%. 50%.
Right. Yeah.
Robert, can I weigh in here because I just want to try to direct the focus of just what we were doing.
Speak louder.
If they are good, most people won't listen anyhow. The last discussion we just had, now it moves into transition. So we would be at, if they were at a preliminary hearing, Ron, and here we are talking about things, and they say, well, what is the input of staff? And they would say, well, here's the fire department's input. So we cannot have discussion later on about this, that, or what they said, or, do they need a cistern or not? This needs to be worked out and in fact, and figured out when you come to the preliminary thing. We cannot be at, that's what I thought we're trying to get to today, to try to answer and ask some good questions. But when we get there, there has to be, this is the answer and this is the proposal. There can't be any question marks, anything that we did. Otherwise, you're going to have the rest of the town do just what we've done for 20 years. Say, well, vote it down. We don't want this. There's too many questions unanswered. And that's where it goes over and over again. So we can't have, and this is our fire marshal. So amateur people and the constituency are going to say, this guy knows what he's talking about. We're not going to listen to a hypothetical thing. We're going to listen to our elected officials in our fire department. We need to have these answers so that you can come back with concrete answers and input of what we're doing. That's my-
Miranda, would you like to discuss that? Miranda?
It's really hard to hear Roger. So
Can I
someone, happy
paraphrase?
to, but someone's gonna have to repeat it for me.
Can I paraphrase? Can you hear me okay, Miranda?
Yep. Yep.
Roger, got in the soapbox, was very impressive. I appreciate the comments. And he said that essentially, you know, the fire marshal is our authority in the matter, and the public and everyone else is going to trust what the fire marshal says. And if there's any question marks in Ron's proposal as of now, based on, you know, some unresolved discussions around the cistern or anything else, this proposal is gonna have a lot better fighting chance if there's no more questions at that point, that this is resolved. And so Roger's saying, let's tease out these questions. Let's find the areas that are unanswered with the rest of our discussion here today. And make sure that Ron comes back to us with his actual official application that has these questions already answered, so that we don't fall into the same trap that we've fallen into for 20 years and have the public going every which way like a logo vote. And then it'll get tanked.
In a
So-
similar manner, we had a bunch of questions from our December 20th meeting, which I thought we were going to address tonight.
Is that fair, Roger? Did I capture the?
Exactly, and I would say the same thing for water, sewer, for the JDA. So we can't have these things unanswered, but they have to be part of the proposal.
And
They need to be part of the proposal.
Right. I, for one, agree with Roger. I think that's good advice. And, you know, I feel that everyone in this town wants our town to continue to thrive and do great. And, Ron is a key player in all of it. So I think that's some sound advice from Roger. I mean, that's my comment on it.
Maybe I could just add, you know, I agree, and I guess I'm not going to speak for Ron, but I think that's what Ron's aiming to do here is to try and continue to get as much feedback as he possibly can, so that at the time of PUD submission, it is complete, but he wants to hear everything that you have to say. And so I guess was my understanding, that was the hope, is that, you know, since the evaluating authority of a PUD is both the planning commission and the board of trustees, that there was value in having you come together to make sure that Ron is continuing
Well,
to
yeah, I
get
think,
feedback. Yeah.
So Miranda,
Sidetrack.
Yeah, but that brings I mean, to the same point, it's not just on NCDDR, right? Like if town staff or Nederland Fire Protection District are gonna have comments on a PUD and we need to evaluate it based on those comments, we need justification for those. Like, we can't just say, don't put a cistern on the roof, doesn't mean anything to me, right? I don't know why not. And so-
Let's clarify that, right? They said they don't necessarily want it or need it, but they're not opposing me putting it there. I don't think everybody got that.
I mean,
They don't
it's-
object to me.
it's not what's written.
They're not gonna use
It's not
it.
what's written. Marshall Jocelyn is opposing it.
Yeah.
So.
that's just the
Which I'm happy to address that once I have an answer. Yeah.
Well, so the question is, also goes back to preliminary plan versus preliminary PUD plan versus final PUD plan. This is a preliminary PUD plan. The requirements that the town has for a preliminary PUD plan are pretty loose, and and it doesn't ask for a lot of specifics. And so that gets back to the question of, this is great, and we've gotten we're getting some good feedback, but we need also to understand how that process is going to work. Because the kinds of questions that you're raising and that are raised by the staff, by the fire department and JVA and all, really are details that need to be worked out at the final PUD.
Well, that's why we're wanting to do it. to the final PUD. Because we really feel we've done everything we can in terms of what a preliminary would be. But I want to say,
Just a second. You just said something, Ansel, was because you're gonna go for this final PUD, and you just said you're going for the preliminary, and you're now saying you're going for the final, which is there gonna be?
We've already done the preliminary. In our mind, we've already done the preliminary.
Oh,
PUD.
you prepared, okay.
That's what this is.
Yes.
Is the
Gotcha.
preliminary.
And we're
Maybe-
saying, once it comes to a final hearing, these answers should be answered. to
Gotcha.
this question. That's all we're saying.
reason
We
for
don't need to sit down.
back
No.
was to answer questions, and we've met with the fire department, we've met with town staff, we've met with JVA, and we've got their input. Now, there are some things that we can't do for the fire department.
Yeah.
And I spent an hour and a half to 2 hours with the chief talking about the very issues that you brought up, and he gave his comments.
Comments after you talk to them?
Yes.
Yeah, we plan to address this in the final aim to kind of like a back and forth Ron's answers to our questions. So it's really straightforward. It just didn't have time for that.
I mean, I know what I would like to see.
Yeah.
If there's anything that has been discussed with town staff or NPD that NCDDR is going to address differently than town staff or NPD is recommending, I would just like that really clearly laid out. Like, I don't have a problem with it being a different way of addressing, it, right? Like with not going with the marshal's recommendation, for instance. I have no problem with that.
The more specific your question, the better I can give an answer. Mr. Reese asked, will the street be open?
Yeah.
Her answer is yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And if that isn't clear at this meeting, it'll certainly be in the PUD. And if there's others from the fire department, make them as specific as will the street be open or will it not? And if it isn't, what periods of time? And I tried to do that here. Certainly put it in the PUD final proposal.
And
So-
I'll tell you, Ron, if you would commit to some kind of a notification, advance notification to the business owners when you're gonna have to, let's say you got a crane or something coming,
But
you know you're gonna have
a closure anyway.
yeah.
So the town normally does that, I think.
So a question that I have is on page 19 of 69, and it says anticipated development schedule. I think we need to get a little bit of clarity between what a preliminary and a final is, because it says per Nederland Municipal Code 16-155A, the final application shall be filed within 1 year of approval of the preliminary application.
Wait, what are you referencing?
Page 19 of 69.
I think it's in
Here,
the
I'll
packet, not in that.
Yeah, it's in the packet.
So maybe I can speak to that. It's Miranda. I can speak to that a bit on Ron's behalf. So in talking with staff. Oh, can you hear me?
So, yeah, you keep going in and out. Are you talking
Yeah.
about the development schedule?
Yes.
Okay, go
So
for it.
Ron, when talking to staff, recognizes that I think there's two things I want to say, but Ron, when talking to staff, recognizes that that's going to be a bit challenging. And so originally was looking for kind of a phased approach process to PUD approval and development. However, last month, Ron brought forward a request asking for a variance to the current code that would allow him to skip preliminary PUD and go straight to final. And as staff, we recommended spending the time to rewrite the PUD code because it's got some challenges. If you look at preliminary to final, it's really, there's not great evaluating criteria. There's not a lot of difference between the two. And even you're seeing tonight, like, it's like, what's preliminary and what's final? It's a little bit wonky. And so the recommendation is that we work with SE Group, we work with DOLA, who's got a draft land use code, and Cheney Bostic, and we start to really look at what should the PUD code recommendations or guidelines be, so there's better evaluating criteria for these large scale developments. And Ron has supported that because the recommendation of staff is that when you amend the PUD code, you still allow a variance process, but you make it cleaner and tighter and clearer, which I think Eric is really speaking to, on exactly what the Board of Trustees and the Planning Commission are evaluating. Because if you look at current code, many of these things that you're talking about, as Eric has noted, are not a requirement for PUD, but I think that there is a strong desire of the Planning Commission and the BOT to have a bit more authority and control, especially over downtown development. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing a sub-area plan as a part of your comp plan. So Ron is really watching that process. He's been engaging in that process. And I think that's really where we stand, is why we're just kind of in feedback mode, is because there's so many things up in the air that have to come and get settled down a bit in order for Ron to then officially submit a new application that really checks all those boxes.
So if I'm to understand this correctly, we still have yet to submit the preliminary application.
So Ron did submit.
Submitted and withdrawn.
Correct.
Right, but it's not, like, it hasn't come before the BOT or anything. We're still in preliminary application.
If
It's planning to go straight to
Yeah,
final.
yes, the plan is to go to final, to
But
get the
there
rest.
is no plan, because there's nothing in code that allows Ron to go straight to final. So Ron did a request asking that current code be amended to allow for a variance to go straight to final. But the recommendation is amend the PUD code altogether, because it's very confusing.
Got it.
And allow the variance at the same time.
Because we have vetted this with the Board of Trustees, the Planning Commission. We've sat in this room and made presentation after presentation, not probably to all of you, but I've been involved in those presentations, and we feel that we've spent the time. And with this feedback that we're getting from you all, we feel like we will have the information to go forward and prepare a final PUD plan.
Yeah, but code has no feelings.
Right.
Code has no feelings, so that means it still needs to be amended in some way for that to be possible.
Correct.
So that's still something we have to do.
And I just want to clarify this. So my question is not whether or not we're ready. That's not what I'm trying to get at, because right here, what it says is that the applicant will need 5 years to complete all the necessary plans. Is required, to need 5 years to go through that studying process, and then it's another 5 to 10 years for build out. No?
No, that 5 years is considered part of the phasing. I mean, we have most of the work done for the Amsterdam, but what needs to be done now is the engineering work for the superstructure. The architectural work is all done. So we need maybe a year for that, maybe not. Maybe we can get it done in 6 months. But a lot of it has to be timed to our weather cycle too. I mean, we might get the engineering done, and if it's a long part of the year, we're not going to start in the middle of the winter with the foundation. So, and it also, we're going to have to go and find engineering firms that can conform to what our needs are. And if somebody says, well, gee, yeah, we'd love to do it, but it'll take us 3 years to do it, we're not going to hire them.
So if I read this correctly, is it saying that it'll take you 5 years to break? Okay. Just because in that, on page 19 of 69, the anticipated development schedule, it just reads as if we need 5 years to get to final, and then after complete construction of all sites.
It's not what's intended.
Okay,
Yeah,
and that's
let's
what I'm saying.
clarify.
That's what I'm saying. We need to clarify that in order for it to come through. So folks don't have the same questions that I do.
And so you don't have to tell the same story.
And so you don't have to tell the same story.
That was one of the things I had some feedback on when we met, was that it would be really helpful to have a timeline, a visual timeline that kind of showed the milestones of the project and when you were going to do that. That was one of the things we talked about, that maybe that would help to show the public how it would actually work out. And as I recall, it wasn't 5 to 10. You were talking about it maybe as long as 12 to 15 years, at 2 to 3 years per building, and doing them sequentially.
Well, that was worst case scenario. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're on the threshold of another world war. That happens,
Right.
everything's off the table.
But at least put down a timeline that you feel.
Well, And
You can be general and adjusted, but you know what, we're looking for some visual to be able to kind of help us see.
What starts when?
we'd like a, okay, we could do that. But my concern is, that when I do something like that, if there's unforeseen circumstances that arise, that it can be altered to accommodate those.
Put that underneath the timeline.
Put it in parentheses.
Yeah,
Yeah.
asterisk.
That's fine,
Yeah.
because there's just all kinds of delays.
You should probably put realistic ranges in the time.
And I could just give you a real good example. When Andrew was doing the Kathmandu, they accidentally topped into the wrong water line and they had to buy a valve and only one of what they needed existed in the entire country. So it held up the project 2 weeks. Could have held it up for 2 or 3 months if they'd had to manufacture the valve.
Boy, we don't need that kind of finality. We're talking about show major milestones. Hey, we expect to break ground. Here's where it is. At this year, we expect to be here. We're talking about generalizations that we can look at the whole project and say, okay, it's gonna be 2036 before it's done. And we'll be able to look right at the timeline and see it. As you asked, you know,
Tentative timeline
Yeah,
with
that's-
caveats.
and that's fine.
We're gonna celebrate your 100th birthday at the cutting. Yeah, put your birthdays in there.
I mean, with all this engineering, I'm kind of surprised it's not already in there. I mean, I'm the people that did these, it doesn't even have to have dates to it yet. Just here's where the expected major for construction milestones are gonna be. Here's when we're gonna be done with building 1. Here's when we anticipate breaking ground on building 2. You know, general, long, you know, big milestones timeline, I think would be very helpful.
We're no engineers involved in this.
Really? Did this packet?
Architects.
Architects.
Or architects, somebody, I'm sure you have some professionals who could do this, right?
Yeah. And I'm not an engineer, but I can do the timeline.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And again, without rehashing everything we talked about on December 20th, we have a nice list of questions already there, so we
Mhm.
could address those. You know,
Who has, did you get, yeah, where are those questions?
it's part of the minutes.
Okay.
Britt has them, yeah.
Yeah, because Nancy needs those questions.
Well, we can move on to parks. We want to move on to parks. Parks was concerned with snow removal and how that would be addressed, how much town would be expected to help with that. They were also interested in ADA accessibility. I did, and this was a question that I had. I noticed that there were a number of staircases. I mean, I'm talking pretty loud. I'm not gonna talk loud like this. Y'all just have to come in. But I saw a lot of staircases
Jesse.
going down to the sidewalks. In the plans. And I'm wondering if things like that can maybe be adapted to be more accessible to folks who might be differently able.
Oh, it's very adaptive. I mean, that's all been considered. Taken into consideration, the ADA requirements. We will meet all ADA requirements. And if you look at the elevation.
Yeah.
The north elevation of the, it's actually
Are we talking about online crossing?
of Alpine Crossing, see that there's stairs on the steps.
Yeah.
Upstairs, I'm sorry, there's 2 parallel sidewalks. One has steps and one doesn't. And they get you to the same place all the way across. The
ADA requirements are, pages, no steps.
on page 22.
And interesting, the grade from 119 to Snyder is 5%. That's exactly the requirement of the ADA.
Really?
It's just totally coincidental.
How about that?
That you could have an for 119, meets the grade.
I'm looking at the First Street elevation, looking at north.
Which page?
That's on page 27.
22. Are you looking at 26?
Well, look at, it's probably easier to see it on 22
Okay, I'll look at-
Which is a bird's eye view of the plan view.
plan view.
Yeah.
Look on the
You can
north.
see on the north elevation, it's the south side, on First Street, the frontage on First Street. There's a sidewalk that runs along adjacent to the parking, and then up above, you take steps up to a covered walkway.
Right.
And so then there's, you could get to that covered walkway if you're up above, up on, Bridge Street.
Sure. But it would be difficult to get up there if you were, for instance, coming from, just across the street, for instance, from, let's say, Busey Brews, brewery right across the way, and you wanted to get up onto that covered walkway to get into a retail store or something along those, that would be kind of difficult to access because of all the up to that walkway. You have to go all the way around. At least that's how I'm reading it.
Well, where the, truck lane is, parking lane, there's the access there, that's mid.
And how do I pronounce that? How is that Wolke?
It's Wolke, so that's correct.
Just making sure I'm saying it. Wolke's Way.
Wolke's Way.
So it would kind of be like people would need to go to Wolke's Way, they could go underneath that little,
Across the street.
something, you could get to that covered walkway.
And again, this is conceptual,
No, I understand.
so.
But just in
Yeah,
general,
no,
like
we're
the
gonna-
more ramps, rather than, because
Yeah.
in general, principles of universal design, right, it's like people who are, able to walk, without any trouble can go up ramps as well, right? It's
Right.
just staircases that restrict people. So the more that we can design for everyone, rather than have to duplicate, like have a staircase and a ramp, it just how a ramp would work.
I tore the meniscus in my knee about 4 weeks ago, and so I am so totally sympathetic to anyone who has trouble with walking and stairs. And not that that's not the first time I've had troubles with my
So
knees.
I would like to make a comment that nobody's brought up. As you all know, I'm back-end parking fanatic, and there's a reason, I've told it publicly. But I would like to have parking for this chain to back in at 90 degrees from where it is now. Cars go head in to the northeast, and I'd prefer to have the back end to where the front of the car goes to the south. I think that makes the snow removal easier. Certainly, if people can't back in, off the park, that's be inside. But if somebody is head in and they can't, because of the snow right now, there's many cars that skid and slide into the other person beside them down. Happens all the time. So it happened during the last snowstorm. It's safer. It's the best thing. And you go to certain countries like Japan, everybody backs in everywhere. It's the Deming idea because it is safer. And I want to include that in the final PUD. And I want everybody to know I'm going to put it in there so that there's no screaming and yelling. So far, Big Springs has worked out fairly well. There's just one person who keeps parking head in.
Obstinate, yeah,
And,
we know.
she's stubborn. So that's super not
You might be
enforcing it.
talking about my wife.
Well, nevertheless, it's worked very well. And it's starting to be used more and more throughout the country. And I want to use it in this project because of the safety concerns. It's just simply a better way to park vehicles.
So can we stick, do these work sessions end 9 o'clock and we go for 2 hours? Okay, so we need to keep moving along on the town, because I think some of us have what questions are, that are
You did some.
those town questions. Yeah, I have one. Who is in CBDR beyond you? Like, there's you, and then you have a partner, and you have a third partner for one of the proposals, but like, who are we dealing with as time goes on? And it may be you, but like, it just seems like even you alone seems like a big task. So I'm like, who's in CBDR?
Well, there will be partners, certainly, in terms of financing.
everything. Logistics, for financing, future decisions.
And then, as people keep asking, what happens if I die? Well,
No, when you win the lottery, when you win the lottery.
I think it give, I mean, I feel like you need a strong team while you're alive too.
Irregardless.
At some point, bring them in to introduce the ones that are here. There's going to be plenty of people who are local that are going to be on the team. And in the event, if I die, I have one daughter who's going to be the trustee. Most of the people who are on the team will be her. And the team will expand with equity partners. So not only will I be personally involved, but there will be financing entities that are involved. Most likely others, I'm not sure just who they would be perhaps some of the lenders want to be involved. So, and I don't know who they are because until we have approval of the project, I'm not going to run out and get those people.
Yeah, just for me, approving the project involves knowing the certainty of the entity we're approving it for. Yeah.
Well, I think by the time we're at final reading, we will have those answers. We will have that in place because we will have to have answered all of your questions.
I think
how
we'll
it
have,
works.
I'm not so sure about.
Not the financing, but.
Okay, that's what I
Sorry.
was going to say. The financing will be the last, but we will have the engineering firms in place. We will have, if there's additional architects, and there will be, because Debbie Davenport deals primarily in residential. She doesn't deal in commercial. So Oz will probably have a part again. Whereas Oz is, people I started with in this project at Oz have now all retired. But there's very competent new folks in the firm, and they have a very good reputation. As you know, they did the library, and they also did Salton, and they're a reputable, solid firm. And so you'll know who those are when we get to final answering the questions. I am very concerned about the fire department, and I think this is going to fall on staff.
We can all chat about it, yeah. We'll talk with Andrew and you probably.
Okay.
Well, I talked, so Andrew is the second in command. I did not talk to the chief. I talked to Andrew.
Yeah, and the fire marshal.
Yeah.
He's the one,
Andrew
he's the only one you probably talked to.
I talked to.
Well, Andrew's comment was they have a book of rules 2 inches thick. And he says, as long as your engineers meet everything in this book, we're going to be happy. So I plan on getting a copy of that book.
Well, and I do believe that, I mean, I did talk to someone at the fire department who was like second in charge. Does that sound right?
I think so. Andrew's the only one I deal with.
Andrew's second charge.
Yeah.
Is he? Okay. So
Andrew's John.
Yeah, I'm sure I talked with you.
That would have been who, yeah. That would have been who I referred you to.
So we talked through all of his comments and I feel very confident that we can address them.
And they've already addressed some of staffs that will be in there, that will be in the AIM kind of piece. So we'll have the questions, kind of the details of, they've addressed some of Nikki's. We'll add in Andrew's, I already shot him an email and we'll kind of have that more. And maybe that's just a discussion we have a little bit further, just to clean that AIM up for everyone, so it's not confusing.
And JVA has this memo, if we keep moving on down.
Yes.
To, regarding streets. I'm not going to enumerate all of the different studies that they're suggesting here, but is the intention to get those studies done for the PUD?
Our intention at this point with JVA is really the concern for the water and sewer systems.
Yeah. This is about streets. So there's they're recommending for Hillside, for instance, they're recommending a drainage study. And also street connection and turning movements, a vehicle turning analysis to access trash and emergency vehicles. There's just a whole list of things that JVA has provided in this memo, and I'm wondering if we're planning on.
That would all be part of the
Getting that
final
done.
PUD.
Great.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy enough to know that these are going to be done. Like, I don't need to know the answers to them now. Just that
Yes, we are literally
intend on-
just starting into that.
In that same vein, I saw in here a couple of notes about the underground parking structure and the studies necessary to determine if that's feasible. What happens if the,
Let me explain.
Wait, let's let. him
well, it's
answer
just
the
what,
question.
what happens if you do the study and it says, hey, we can't do underground parking? Like,
We modify the plan.
right, well, but there's just saying like part of, and does that happen before you bring the final?
I would imagine that you will need to do some preliminary geotech, right?
Sure.
Before we do the final PUD. So before we submit, I should say.
Okay.
Yeah.
It seems like that's
That
amazing.
seems
Like,
like a really good idea for all the
Because
parcels where you're going deep.
Because Ron will be spending a lot of money to do the work that's required for the final PUD. And we don't want that to go out the window.
And if you're considering geothermal as well, I mean, you definitely need to know what's happening
Yes.
for parking and geothermal, anything underground.
But Ron, I mean, an honest question, if the parking's not feasible, you said that it'll be reworked, but I think I've heard you say before that you need the parking.
Reason for 2 levels of parking. This goes to your question about what about the guys across the street? Not only is there consideration during construction, but the second level of parking is designed for public parking. I had a study done long ago by a company by the name of Walker. And if there aren't 2 levels of parking, there'll be no parking at all for the people across the street. The south side, currently, their customers park on my lots free for, and most of the cars that are parking there are their customers. My tenants object to that. They say, I am subsidizing the competition for my tenants, and they don't like that. But nevertheless, my feeling is that we want to cooperate. We want to see everybody succeed. 1 level of parking would just take care of the main thing, the Alpine crossing. 2 levels will give equal parking for everybody across the street and around. So that necessitates, to support 2 levels of parking, you have to have 3 stories of commercial activity or housing, mixed use. And I'm not very sure that people understand that's why there's a plan for 2 levels of parking. If we get.
So the question
but it-
though was, if the parking, if it's determined that the parking won't work because of the geotechnical aspects, what will you do?
Yeah, not so much the parking, but the excavation.
We like that part.
Yeah, right.
I often point out to people, I've done and had buildings in Washington, DC. Washington, DC is built on a swamp. There are major 14-story buildings, which is the height limit in Washington, DC.
We're not gonna go that high.
So the hydrological engineers know how to fix these problems. And a lot of people who have no background in this kind of activity, whatever, don't realize that those are easily solved problems. I mean, how can you have an entire city parked on a swamp and not have some engineer that's figured out how to get those buildings there? So when I get this question, I say, this is an engineering question. I know it can be answered. I've seen it answered throughout the world. And why people keep bringing it up as if there is no answer really puzzles me. It's been answered throughout the world in all kinds of places.
Well, that's why it was very confusing when you said you'd rework the plan. There is no reworking of the plan. The plan is 2 levels of parking and 3 stories. And so,
Yes.
Please clarify.
Then there is no plan.
right.
Gotcha. Okay.
I guess it's not
That
that
was-
was much concern of whether or not it would be possible in the, sense of physical reality. But whether it would be possible in the sense of how much it would cost.
Yeah, it could be
Right, like if it
economic.
became,
It costs about $50,000 per parking space at this altitude, at this distance from the cement.
It's a lot of bake sales.
Mhm.
In the parking discussion, so right now, the same situation that you're describing along First Street also happens on Snyder Street with Salto, and, you know, most of the people who are at Salto are parking across the street or in the lot where the farmer's market is held, which is also another question of what happens to the farmer's market?
Oh, well, there's a nice little, well, I don't think quite there. There's a plaza in the courtyard. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Uh,
yeah.
Part of the plan is a courtyard.
Yeah.
And that
But
could be, who's, go ahead.
yeah, my question is more about that, the parking specifically for Snyder Street and the current main parking lot there on the corner of Second and Snyder. Like, is all of that to be replaced by people parking underground?
Yes,
And
the underground parking is. provided by the-
I'm just guessing, a lot of the people who stop at Salto for a cup of coffee are not gonna go park in an underground parking garage and walk all the way around to go to Salto.
There's parallel parking along. On the
West side.
Oh, right
Right,
there.
but that's good, I mean,
So
I
that's-
drive through there every day, like there's usually a dozen cars in there, and I'm guessing we're not gonna get a dozen cars parallel parked along that stretch.
No, you get 6.
Right, so I'm saying, like, what if we did the diagonal parking that you're doing along First Street, do the same thing along Snyder Street to allow for a little bit more comparable levels of on-street parking that we have right now.
Is there room? I don't know if there's room.
Well, it would mean bumping back the building, you know, whatever, some number of feet.
Well, am I required to salt park?
I'm not saying I'm not saying it's that, but we're gonna have additional businesses and additional residents and additional activities going on in this new building. And just seeing how people park and.
I mean, to be fair, we're gonna go from what we have now, just what, 20, maybe 30, maybe 30 to 40 spaces total. If people like really cram in front of Salto and then cram in onto the wrong side, you know, to 100 and something spaces underground. Like, you know, I think that folks are parking right now wherever they can to get to whichever business they're going to. That might include parking in front of Salto to go somewhere else, right? Like, so that will be alleviated to some extent. Because I've definitely had trouble getting into Salto and the place is empty. Right, so I'm like, where are all these people parked? No one's in Scotch. So, yeah.
And there's,
Parking wise, just the sheer volume of added spaces are gonna create more rotation on the street side. That's my suspicion, but I'm not an expert on it.
I wanted to comment. The cutout front of Salto, takes since cars, was put there by myself at my expense to help Salto. That's gonna be taken away. But you've got to consider the fact that if a bridge goes across from Concord to Snyder, and you have, Salto has just morphed their parking into angled parking in the last 3 or 4 months. So now they could get 2 more cars in front of their place by angling in instead of having parallel. Fine with me. But the street narrows. One of the things about the corner where Salto is, where Second and Snyder intersect, this is because of 2 subdivisions intersecting. The streets get narrower and narrower. It starts out real wide at the roundabout, and as you go down the street, it turns into a 27-foot right of way. And Lee Stedell, county surveyor who lives here in Nederland, spent hours, days working out the survey to try to make it the best for everybody. So I've tried to help Salto with in terms of they're going to just have to have people, if they want to go to South, they're going to park in the garage. There's no other alternative. And it's going to change.
and you do have an access point right there in front of Salto.
There would
So.
be a door and a sidewalk. that goes into this lower level parking, so they can go out there.
If the bridge goes through and that becomes a throughfare, like a
walking.
non-emergency act, like it becomes an actual like traffic through, do we have to widen Snyder Street there? Is it, I mean, is that
Well,
wide
that's
enough to
part of the
accommodate?
negotiation. You might want to ask me for 4 or 5 feet to widen the street. So there's a lot of things that I feel are negotiable with somebody. Because yes, I think you need a wider street there.
Yeah.
And if you need my land, then we have to come to some agreement. I don't know if it's part of the PUD or what. So, but we have to know what it is for approval of the PUD.
How do we figure out?
The multimodal transportation plan.
Just answer my question.
Yes, yes, part of it will. So part of those
Very good
recommendations.
question. Trying to give you our thoughts. This is not something we haven't thought about. We have thought about.
Yeah, no, just, yeah, that was my question, is how do we find out that answer? And that's.
The wider street.
Eric, what's the next?
The next, I think we addressed the utilities. I think
Right away.
right up at the top. Skip that one. And the last one here was sustainability. From the aim. So the, in general, said that the plan does incorporate many key sustainable practices. And that she's very happy about that. Main concerns are continued use of natural gas long-term. Substantial increase in vehicles, but coupled with the lack of space for bicycles. So I think Leah's looking for maybe addressing people who might be biking to this development with bike racks, maybe bike lanes or bike passageways, ways that bikes can kind of engage with this.
We will
Picture the
accommodate,
bikes everywhere, all over the place.
we will accommodate bicycles.
I mean,
This is kind of a smaller range.
Yeah, but this is something that people are going to want to see.
Absolutely.
I think it's quite important to our community in particular, that that's addressed in some way.
Go ahead.
And
I have a question, or I have something to ask.
the natural gas thing is,
Yeah,
it's a big question, and then the roofing materials, something that get concerned about. And I had a question about that because they seem fine to me.
But the natural gas, we talked a little bit about this round, like if you were to consider going more electrifying building, I mean, you're gonna have geothermal, you're gonna have solar, you're gonna have a generator backup. If you were to, right now with the IRA, there's so much money for developers and the build to rent movement as a whole type of construction where people are building properties and homes to rent them or, buildings to rent them. And that there's a lot of money in tax incentives and subsidies for heat pump technology. And I think one thing I worry about with this whole project is your costs are going to be so high that you'll have to charge a lot of rent to your businesses as well as your residential because you'll have to recoup your cost. And so places where you can maybe bring down your costs might be, where you look at these incentives, you look at heat pump, you look at the things that the government's getting behind for electrification. And, does the natural gas have to be part of this? Maybe, maybe not. Or, can you tone it down? But it's, because if you talk to me about central HVAC, I think one of your partners is an HVAC guy, but if they're running ducts or, hydronic through all the floors, you got to make thicker floors, everything you're just driving your costs up. So that's what I wonder about, just considering technologies that could control your costs so that your rents ultimately will be rentable for local businesses.
Been in the housing business for a long time.
Yeah.
And.
But it's different,
natural
it's different
gas
now.
backup
It's different now.
must. This is just like the tank of water on the top of the building. When you have 50 units, maybe 100 people, or 150, and you don't have water from a source, you've got crying babies, you've got all kinds of problems if the city water system fails. And within the last 5 years, the city water system has failed. It right during the middle of frozen dead guy days 3 or 4 years ago, the water main at the roundabout blew up.
But I'm gonna say one thing, this whole development's going in complete communities with no natural gas. 100% electrified.
Well,
It's something
they
you
can do
can
that.
do.
But I'm
To say that you need a natural gas backup is just something to look at.
Yeah. I'm a great proponent of having reserves and alternative sources, albeit natural gas could be the emergency generator. But I think redundancy is a must and will be in the future, because Maryland has notoriously had electrical outages.
But you can't run pumps and fans without electricity, even if
That's why
if
you
in a
have
heat source.
a gas fire or an oil fire.
Yeah, but something needs to move, like when you heat it, when you heat the fluid with gas, you have to move it around. The pumps run on electricity, like to say that, when there's a blackout, natural gas things don't work either.
Natural gas generator.
You have a natural gas
Backup.
generator
Yeah.
and you have an oil generator.
Yeah.
After the big, put in a 2,500 gallon oil tank right next to the Amsterdam
I
to
know.
run their complete phone service so they'd never go out again. One guy lived in that building there and ran the system, and people carried food to him for 3 weeks during that snowstorm. And you have to plan for every contingency, and you have to utilize, as far as I'm concerned, every option that you have. Now, using electricity for the primary mode, sure, that makes sense. Heat pumps, geothermal under the building, this sort of thing, yeah. And we're very cognizant that every one of these things runs up the cost. The question is, what happens when nobody has water or electricity and there's 50 people? And you'll have people cut logs and burn them in their
Well,
apartment.
I'm not saying you wouldn't want to back up, but yeah, all I'm saying is the cost of this just looks expensive. How are you going to keep the rent down? That's just what I
Then
think.
the best we could do tonight is, we're trying to get we got the questions, we got comments from.
Right, well, I'm piggybacking on her comment about
You just
electrification.
need to know that this is the question,
Okay.
to come at the presentation.
And
Okay.
we're running out of time.
I get the roofing material,
I don't know.
It just needs to be class A roof.
yeah, it's a question.
Leah needs to give us.
Yes, more specific on that. I had just a very easy one, I think, like on the. One proposed to be on the other side of the building.
Rather than on
rather
this
than
road.
the highway side. Just because I know that I wouldn't want to play next to the highway necessarily, but maybe
I
on the
think-
other side where it's between the residential.
I think the only counterpoint to that is south facing sun exposure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Even though natural is a lot of ice. Generational.
That's pretty good. Get it all.
What about, architecture design,
Aesthetics.
aesthetics? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of comments where it's like, oh, can we not have it look like X, I believe
There's a lot
Central
of
City, right? A lot of Central City, even though you were trying to model it off of Leadville. And so I think that's what I hear is the biggest feedback is, we want the mountain charm look to it, but then they're not satisfied with the mountain charm look. So
Yeah, I mean, this is not, again, this is one of those things like.
we were never going to make everyone happy. Right.
I mean, personally, I think it's fabulous. But I mean, that doesn't really mean it.
The logo?
We're in the process of it.
That's another meeting.
I can tell you this.
This is a general question I have because I'm new to this process. Pardon me if it's totally ignorant, but is there any wiggle room on the height? I mean, you're asking for a height exemption to make it taller, but would there be any possibility of making it shorter?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's kind of one thing.
2 stories instead of 3? Is that?
Or even 3 stories with a 1-foot floor versus a 2-foot floor and 8-foot ceilings versus not 10.
From the fact that I've searched all over, why is there 35 foot height? Because that's the length of the fire truck ladder.
Right, but this is like a general question, is like, is that something that would be a
I
negotiable
suppose
point
so,
of
but
like,
we have to cram, that raises the cost.
right,
When you have to cram all
No,
of
no,
the things.
no,
into
you have
that.
shorter, a taller building is more expensive than a shorter building.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
more
also
materials are
You
more
have to
expensive.
understand the human side of the retail. And the retailers want ceilings that are at least 12 feet high. Okay, and there's been many fights in Boulder over retail spaces in that regard. It just turns people off to go into a retail space that has a 7-foot ceiling.
Well, 7, yeah, but no one is 7.
So then 14 foot, so we've already gone to 12 feet. But for the utilities you need in terms of function, and everybody likes this room, look at the height of this room. It's a comfortable, friendly room. And that's what you need to provide for successful retail space. And you won't get tenants because they know what entices customers to buy. And that's a feeling of
it
comfort.
was more just a question of 2 stories versus 3 stories, like,
No.
that was more just a question, is that?
We've studied this for 15 years
Yeah.
to try and
Yeah.
to create an environment that helps the entire area, including guys across the street, gives them parking. It's 2 levels of parking and 3 stories, or it's not going to be functional.
And there's a.
At least not, I would, that's,
Right, okay, that was the answer, just trying.
And the third floor really makes the parking feasible, or helps to make the parking
Yeah.
feasible.
the town of Dover has had many consultants come and give them advice. Famous names like Dan Burton and guys, Joe McCuddy, done detailed studies of the financial success. And yeah, we're going to have to find out whether or not it costs more than we can make, because we don't want to go broke. And I'll point out that every major development in the town has gone through from the start. So
That's why we don't want this one to.
I particularly don't want it.
So I have a question on the financial backing. Is that disclosed at the final PUD or after that, after it's been approved?
That's going to be disclosed when we get a building permit.
It's not required.
It's not required.
That's not, and it's a competitive thing. We know this, that to get the best price in terms of doing it, we have to have a building permit in our hand. Banks and lenders are going to have told me repeatedly, when you've got the thing approved and you've got a building permit in your hand, come and see us. Otherwise, don't waste our time, because we don't know if you're ever going to get it or not. Very abrupt.
So I just want to, Tanya has her hand up online.
Go
Thank
ahead,
you.
Tanya.
Hey, I mean, I've got a lot of things to ask, but I just wanted to ask Ron about the height limit. I was always told by you, Ron, that you want the height limit for peaked roofs, and I'm not seeing any peaked roof on this design.
Yeah. That's
So,
another
is this the final design?
Well, Tanya, I've always said the retail space needs to have 12-foot ceilings minimum. And yes, it would give
No,
us.
you told me peaked roofs many times. Oh, for the solar panels. Oh, because it looks better. That's why I need the height lifted.
Flat roof, but not all of them would be featured.
That's incorrect. They're usually
Okay,
slope
so is this the
grade
final
ridiculous.
design, Ron? Is this the final design with the flat roof and the height raised up to 45, 50 feet? So there's no peaked roofs. You just want more ceiling space, more space.
Yes.
Well,
That's it?
It's not, there are.
there are some peaked roofs.
Oh,
Tanya,
I saw them. Not really. It's not like peaked roofs like he was describing. Just want to know if this is this is your final submission?
Close to it. There've been
Okay.
questions that we need to answer.
So, I mean, and to answer, I think it was Luke who was talking, that's the caveat for Ron, is that height variance, that it has to get passed by us in order for this plan to go, for Alpine Crossing is the only place that needs it. So certainly, as a board, that doesn't have to get passed, and then the plan has to get reworked in a way that accommodates our current code. So there is a choice on this. It's not like, do we have a choice? Is there any way we can work around this? We could work around this. It could be worked around. It could be 2 floors. It could, I mean, so that it's not, this is something that will be debated later. And it is probably the biggest debate because almost everything else is within the current code and should probably get passed based on the fact that it's not requiring a variance. That's all I have to say on this.
Thanks, Tanya.
Hey, Nancy, while we have just a second, I wanted to quickly just let you know that the information from us is captured in the minutes from the January 24th Planning Commission meeting.
I sent it to.
Oh, you did just.
I just.
Okay, all
yeah, I
right, sorry.
sent everything.
All right,
Sorry.
great. You're on top.
Yeah.
It's the 24th or the 28th?
24th.
Okay.
I sent you a couple things.
Okay.
Go ahead. Totally. Yes.
Oh, we'll talk about
Yeah.
Well, we're just about, it's, well,
I-
go
I-
ahead, Roger.
Comments. So, well, these are just really truly comments, so I just didn't sense whenever, a week ago, I guess really when I got Miranda's email, but be able to click on the agenda. So my comments are as much for the board and not unlike Tanya was just addressing. Certain things that the town and Ron, we need to work together to at least get answers to direction. And we were talking about, East First Street and the South Side businesses. And I think they could talk about it, but I think the board and moving forward, the planning commission will make the decisions on preliminary approval, but then how does the project go forward? And certainly to do, as you said, 5, 10 years of construction and all that stuff, and not to work with those business, but for me, even more important, and you have gone to many, many people coming here and talking to us about that creek and having that frontage. And so I think somehow the town, and I realize it's not your property, but we need to actually have some kind of a vision and a plan of what to do about the creek there. And if we're gonna do all this construction there in the way that there's that frontage and the road going down to the pedestrian bridge, we need to actually, we have to remove that to make this whole area look good. Otherwise, why are we doing all this stuff?
So removing what? I'm sorry.
The access coming up the hill by the pedestrian bridge. It's not part of this project. That's why I'm addressing the town, the board as much as the developer. So there needs to be work to make this all work, to make this area done. It would be a shame to finish it up and then 8 years later say, well, you know what, let's tear this up and take care of the creek and make this look nice. So that just, it's, as I said, this is much for the town, it is for you. And I think this was addressed in your minutes, you said that the town, we need to have a town planner, we need to have a staff and a planner that works for the town and gives us input. And I know that came up in the planning commission meeting too, but we haven't talked about it tonight. And traditionally, there's a company or a planner that gives input, works for the town, and is paid for by the developer. So somehow an agreement, this would be as much as mostly the board then, to determine how many hours rate, just what that would involve. But it's very much, as we go forward, we need someone that gives us input, which is a neutral planner as best we can be, and who works for the town and not for the developer. The Congress Street Bridge plan, you certainly have gone far, and we talked about the Congress Street. But if this thing is done, again, looking 5, 6, 10 years, and we're actually, it needs to be a viable street, and that bridge needs to be a viable bridge. So we can't do this, in my opinion, we cannot do this project and then say, oh, man, we really should have done that bridge. So this somehow, as a team again, the community, we need to at least have a plan and funding as much as possible in place so that second access bridge, Congress Street Bridge, is a viable thing. We can't just start saying, how do we do this 10 years from now? Not after this project gets started.
Has it been determined? Excuse me, Ron.
I'm raising the questions, I'm not.
We have put it in our strategic goals for funding for the bridge. We have yet to determine, we have yet to determine the place.
That's what I was reading someplace just recently.
I understand,
Okay.
but I think, see, well, and you guys know that. So,
Yep.
every time over all the years, it always comes back to that.
Don't worry, buddy. It's gonna stay on that strategic goals, all right? I promise you that.
It always comes back to Congress, it's a viable place, but.
Oh, yeah.
I certainly would, if I was on the board, I question the total number of 120 rooms for that flex area. Right, I went over to the motel tonight, and there are 0 rooms rented tonight across the way. And that's not average tonight, but I just feel like, I don't know anything about the number, but I think that is a number that should be discussed. Do we need 120 rooms, 60 rooms? You know, that's a challenge. It just needs to, maybe some of the size of the project, the height of the project, maybe a lot of it will be determined what's the viability of the number of rooms that are actually going to be part of that flex part of the hotel. And I think the same thing with 160. I thought I read like there would be 300 housing units when we're all done. That was counting the motel rooms too.
165 plus like 120 extra or something.
Yeah. So way up there. And so, as we talked about at the very beginning, that's 40% of our entire stock right now. So again, this is a much of a challenge for board members. You want to take on like pass.
Don't let them scare you.
Yeah, no, I'm scared. If we really know what number we need, and again, that would also reflect on just how big and ambitious the project should be. Getting real close to the end. Well, we talked water and sewer, but I also think that it's going to be a huge part of the project, and we didn't really talk about PIPs. And what would be the capital money going from this project into the water and sewer, because that's how we could do the expansion. Otherwise, we're not.
Yep.
So are we going to do every room needs to be $50,000 every building, whatever that would be? Because I know when you came and talked about that other project a year or so ago, almost every developer that come here wants some kind of leeway or some kind of help with the PIPs. So that needs to be figured out before we go forward. And the last one, which I think we touched on today, was really was the financing. But if nothing short of, you don't have to show us the financing, the financing, but what if this project goes so far and then something happens? So what is the surety, the bonds that maybe would be put up to, guarantee things way down the line or years ago, if by chance there is a problem. So those are things that it's as much the board of trustees looking forward the town as it is certainly you, Ron, the developer, somehow, because we've never done it. Well, I don't think a lot of towns do this type of size of a project. That's why we're coming together. And that's why it's been so hard, or that's why it's failed, because we've never really pushed forward. And you really have to do that extra thing to answer those questions to ensure everybody that, oh yeah, this definitely would work. This is actually a good thing for everybody. Needs to be win-win. Otherwise it fails. And that's why, it's just gets kicked down the road all the time. Kick the can down. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, Roger.
I think a lot of what you're saying is that the success here is really a town and developer partnership.
Yes.
That's kind of.
Agree.
the
You
thread
better
that
save
you see.
10 minutes.
I'm sorry.
No, I think my thoughts are this way I've always been, but in a roundabout way, I have to work and try to raise those questions. Thank
Consulting plan that operates between the town and the developer has been brought up as an idea for people a number of times. And there are many examples of towns that have done this very thing, even in Colorado and not that far from us. So it may be worth, looking into that as a way to operationalize this project.
I'd be interested
it's
in
not-
how it's paid for, though. That's something that.
It's Miranda. This came up at the planning commission, and I talked to Attorney Madsen about it. And currently, it's on your code, so you can't require a developer to go forward and do that. Now, if you amended your code and said it was a must that they sought out a third party, then fine. But there is no jurisdictional authority at this point to tell Ron or any developer that they need to go forward and pay for a third party planner to review.
Miranda, this is Cheney. Can I ask, won't the downtown sub-area plan kind of do that?
Yeah, I think that's, yes, agreed. And that's, yes, please keep going, because I think so. That provides the guideline that we're looking for when the board wanted to do the sub-area plan.
Yeah, but this is not really, it wouldn't be for the initial,
It's like as things come up. Yeah.
Right. And again, I don't think this is something that we should be requiring of everyone. This is something that we should be asking in order to facilitate a successful partnership. That we come to some agreement on how we're gonna get feedback on how the project is going, because it's a long time that this project is gonna be underway, right? We're talking a decade plus.
Many different BOTs.
Many different boards of trustees, maybe many different staff members. If there was a consulting firm that was contracted to help manage the relationship between town and the developer as this project unfolds and as it builds in some institutional knowledge, I think that would be an extremely powerful thing. So I'm hoping that some kind of negotiation around that can be possible.
Yeah, I sent out an email about more than a year ago to the BOT with that same recommendation. My wife worked with them, and they did a huge development over in Georgetown. She got brought in specifically to help work with that. And there was a firm that was the developer, yes, voluntarily agreed to pay for that, but they represented the town and helped them. And basically that is the arm that when we have these BOT meetings and these planning commission meetings and we have questions, instead of Ron trying to figure out, I'll get back to you that, this person is the expertise that is then representing the town, is then coming back to you and day-to-day working with you. And I'll send that email out again. But there's a firm that was recommended that specializes in working with small towns and just did this huge they sent some information about it that showed, that they were extremely happy with the relationship that ended up with the developer and the town.
You have a consultant right now, and that's JVA. They are very competent people.
But they're not communications people. Wouldn't that be your job? Who's the point person? Oh, the good point. Yeah.
In terms of a lot of things in the past, it's really technical things that have got to be answered by professionals in the field. And JVA has a huge company that has these guys in different departments.
But
And
we're talking about somebody who's gonna literally be the project liaison for the town. And you, not JVA, who costs a lot of money. This is somebody that, I'll send it out. You guys can determine whether or not it's useful again. I sent it out once before. I didn't get any response from anybody about it, but I'll send it out again. But again, I'm not talking out my hind parts. My wife worked on a huge project and said, hey, this would be extremely helpful for the town to look at some kind of representation like this. I'll send out the email again. I'll send it to the BOT. I'll send it to Miranda. Everybody again, you can consider it. But basically, I'm going to tell you, you're saying, what do I need? What do I need to be able to get this across the finish line? We're telling you, we want to feel better. We want to make sure that we're going to have our concerns covered. And we're telling you, this might be one way that we can feel protected as a town, that we have somebody looking out for our interests and that they're going to be our representative, because all of us are volunteers. We don't have the technical expertise to ask the questions about hydrology and engineering studies and all those things. And when you come in here and you give us a bunch of information, we have to go, that sounds right. Okay, so I'll send it out. You can determine or not.
Even putting it on our own community planner
It's a lot.
is a lot, and they'd basically be working this project for 10 years, right? Because it's dedicated. I think a dedicated consultant planner would be extremely useful.
Yeah, it's a common thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you can look at the pros and cons of that, and the BOT can relook at that again, and talk with Miranda, and then somebody would be worthwhile contacting a couple of these firms. I believe there was actually a response from town staff that there was a couple of firms that were looked at. I don't know if anybody said, hey, let's get some costs, and talk to Ron about it or anything. But I would say that this would be one of those things that could help move this project along.
Well, what's great about where we are right now in the process is that you've got a comp plan update going on, you've got a transportation mobility plan coming through the door. I think you've got so much of this feedback. I think Cheney made a great comment. You're going to have new design guidelines. You're going to have sub-area.
plan will help guide this partnership.
Yeah, and so I think that's a big part of all of this, that you haven't had any guidance on that for a long time. The comp plan is old, it's outdated. It was good at the time, but I think you've got a really good team in Jamie. She's the best. She is the best. Did you hear that, Cheney?
Hi, Nancy. Long time no see.
Yes,
Thank you for the kind words.
of course. No, I mean it.
I think all that is true. I just think that no piece of paper is going to be able to replace an actual person who could synthesize all of those things on a regular basis, year on year on year, as this project unfolds. So that's just my.
No chatbot.
No, yeah, you can't do it, Jackie. Actually, Jackie and I tried.
Okay.
It didn't work.
Okay.
Just need the right prompt.
The paid version? No? Okay. I'm sorry, but you have to do. I'm just saying. All right, are we done here?
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Nancy, for
It only took 15